everybody. Welcome to part two of the video. So we finished the first page of the worksheet. We just finished discussing this, right? Again, this racist portrayal of European progress pushing out native savagery, right? Great example of visual storytelling, even if the purpose is kind of toxic. Anyways, so let's move on and talk about graphic novels in particular. We'll have that fill out that quiz sheet, and let me just pull that up actually. So what we're looking at here is this sheet here. So take some time, fill this out. Remember, there's an article that goes along with this. This is what it's referencing. So please do take a look at this. Maybe I should take this to single page. How do I get this? Well, that's good enough. Here we go. Okay, so pause it, fill it out. The answers, what we're looking for, this is the page, right? So this A, right? What you're supposed to do is identify the five parts, right? A, B, C, D, E. Fill out what those stand for. So the first one, A, this is the page. So a page of a comic book, like a page of a book, that's what we call it, a page. B, so you might notice it's divided into these parts, right? These are called panels. So B refers to the panels. And this is one of the essential building blocks of any graphic novel or comic book, right? It's not just usually just a whole page of imagery. We'll see that once in a while in The Best We Could Do, the graphic novel that we're getting into next week or in a couple weeks, I guess. There are a couple pages which are like, it's basically like a painting, taking up the whole page with a single illustration. But to tell a story, usually artists use panels, right? Dividing it into these subsections. C, the frame. So that's the surrounding bit of a panel, right? And this one, you can see it's all very squared black lines, right? So very set. You'll see other kinds of things if you look at Persepolis, another graphic novel. Actually, I have that later in the slideshow. Very different kinds of frames around each panel. You might ask why they use certain different kinds of frames, and why sometimes the action from a panel spills out from the frame. Notice how these ones it's very contained, right? Here's her face. It's cut off by the frame of the panel, right? We're getting this very tight shot, very deliberate. D is a speech bubble, right? So, people speaking we represent that by having a little bubble with a little arrow going towards their mouth. E is the gutter. So that's the space between panels. Often we don't think about that, but as we shall see in The Best We Can Do, sometimes the action from the panel spills out into the gutter, or there's things in the gutter that are part of the action, maybe the background or in the character's mind or something. So the gutter can be used in interesting ways too. Okay, the rest of the quiz. True or false? The author of this essay compares the job of comic book artist to a movie director, a photographer, and a painter. True, right? As we see in here, this is very cinematic. We're having a conversation between two characters that's set up here. Here are two characters. And then we get this like back and forth, right? It's almost like the camera in a movie or TV show is cutting back and forth between the characters as they speak. So, I mean, think about any TV or movie you've seen. This is something that's very commonly done. If you have a conversation going on, you'll have like an establishing shot, and you'll have close-ups of faces as a conversation progresses. So very much like a movie in that sense. Like a photographer too. Notice the composition in the page, right? Notice this panel here is like isolated alone, right? Surrounded by the rest. It's an interesting kind of visual dynamic on the page itself. That's what they mean by composition, or part of what the author means by composition. And a painter, well, colors and the different palette of that kind of stuff also counts, right? Notice like this interesting water design down here. So all these different skills come into play for a comic book artist. True or false? Comic book art is meant to be read sequentially. True, right? You're meant to read it in a sequence like this, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And it tells a story. You're not supposed to just pick random panels on the page, right? You're supposed to read it sequentially in order. And Western comics go in a Z sequence, like zoop, 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 right? Different cultures use different order, right? I'm not very familiar with manga, but apparently manga is read from the back and it takes a different order, right? So this is just a Western convention of comic book art to read it in a Z pattern sequentially. But it's very important when you're going through. You don't read it like do 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 in a spiral or something like that. No, it's meant to be read like this. unless the artist tells you otherwise. This is the convention to read it sequentially in a Z pattern. True or false? All comic book artists and graphic novels use the exact same formula for the page of the design of the page. That is false. As you can see here, the artist is playing with the design, right? You have a big one here. You just have a block of four. You have this one isolated, and you have this long one, then another block of four, right? Not every page of a comic book looks like this. And then number 9, I'll let you think about that. What was the most interesting thing you found? Um, if you want to worry about the bonus, you can. There's a number of comics referenced, and um, things like Odyssey is the big one that that the author talks about a lot, but there are other ones that are referenced. Okay, so let's move on. Let's see if I can get my slideshow back. Where did my slideshow go? Let's go like there. Maybe that'll pull it up. Okay, technical difficulties. Let's see. Let's see if I can pull this up. Hold on a second. Hold on. Bear with me. Huh. Okay, let me see here. Let me just reopen this file. Here we go. Sorry about that. I'm using a program called Screencast-O-Matic, which is a great program, but not perfect. Okay, so let's go down to conventions of graphic novel. So this information you can go through. I'm just expanding a bit on, panels and stuff, giving you a little bit more information. Right, the gutters, and notice this one's from Persepolis. I mentioned earlier, and notice the frames are different, right? They're kind of squiggly, more organic looking. They're not like measured black lines. So it's different kinds of frames. Creates a different kind of gutter space too. Of course, we have dialogue balloons. We also have thought balloons. We get that kind of like cloud shape, right, to indicate thought. We get captions. See here, this square area here or here. And this isn't a character speaking. This is kind of the narrator coming in with information, right? So this is very much like a story if you read it. You'll have the narrator commenting, and you might have dialogue. The author might take you inside someone's thoughts. We also have sound effects, a fun part of comics and graphic novels. Whoop, spacow, right? We even get these in The Best We Could Do. And The Best We Could Do is, not a comic booky kind of thing, but we definitely get, as you'll see, we'll get some sound effects represented in this way. Kind of unique feature and convention of the comic book graphic novel world, and a fun part of it. So some other cool things to think about, transitions, right? Showing passage of time, emphasizing an action sequence, perspective, as we were talking about. Graphic novels are very close to cinematic art forms in the way they show angles and shots and such. There's also a whole visual language of comics. And if you look at each of these symbols, right, with the spirally eyes, the X eyes, the kind of hashed out face, the lines emanating. Even if you're not really into comics or graphic novels, you probably recognize what all these are supposed to represent. This guy's stunned or dazed. This guy's dead or maybe dead asleep. This guy is embarrassed or yeah, embarrassed is probably the best thing, or ashamed or something. Lines. This guy's startled, surprised. Unimpressed. I don't know, something like that. But even if you're not too familiar, there's this whole visual language of comic books, which is separate from other visual languages and other kinds of languages. This is one of the kind of interesting conventions of comic books and graphic novels. Another thing that's going on in comic books, or that comic books depend on, is this idea of closure. This is something Scott McCloud gets into at great length. There's a whole chapter on closure, which is really super interesting. But if you take a look at this picture, right, these Coke bottles, like, we know what's going on here, right? We know that there are more Coke bottles here, even though we can't see them. Our mind fills in that blank, right? Our mind is great at finishing a partially completed idea, right? It doesn't bother us to see a picture like this, but even though it's not complete, we obviously know that there are more bottles over here. It doesn't trouble us in our mind. Our mind does that work for us automatically. And as Scott McCloud notes, this is what comic books depend on. Comic books depend on the phenomenon of observing the parts but perceiving the whole. Great way of putting it. Because when you get a sequence of panels in a comic book, you're just getting snippets of a story. It's not like a movie in the sense that you get to see say if there's an action scene, you get to see the entire thing unfold. In a comic book, you just get snippets of it. Your mind fills in the action between the unrelated panels or seemingly unrelated panels. Um, right? I note here the reader observes two separate panels and mentally pieces together what happens in between, even though there's no panel containing what actually happens in between. Right? We just get these snippets, unlike a movie. So here's a good example. Right? Again, from the Scott McCloud source. So we had this first one. We had this guy with an axe coming at this guy. He's saying, "Now you die." And this guy's like, "No, no, don't get me." And then our next panel is just a scream over top of a cityscape at night. So we don't need to see what happens between. Our mind fills it in. We can make the connection in this narrative between this attack and the consequence of the attack. Right? So this is what comic books depend on. Our ability, our mind's ability to provide this closure between two panels. I mean, if you took either of these away and put them, and your mind wouldn't be able to finish the story, right? But these are not necessarily connected. You could connect these with other stories and tell different stories. But by connecting these in this way, you're telling this very deliberate story. This guy probably got hit with an axe. That's what we're left to think. So this is why we call it sequential art, to tie everything up, right? Everything works in a sequence for comic books and graphic novels. That sequence of panels and that closure, you wouldn't be able to tell a story in this medium. Okay, that's it for now. So please do complete that worksheet and turn that in. I gave you until Sunday, the 15th at midnight, along with the rest of the online stuff. So please do complete that and turn that in. Thank you very much.